It's a quiet afternoon in a hotel car park. Cars come and go. Guests unload luggage. Nothing looks unusual. But beneath the routine, something else is unfolding. What no one here knows is that this meeting has already been months in the making. An undercover officer arrives first. He parks, steps out, and waits. To anyone watching, he looks like just another man killing time. But every movement, every word, is being monitored in real time. Hidden nearby are armed response units, plainclothes officers, surveillance teams. They're close, but invisible. This place wasn't chosen by chance. It offers clear sightlines, controlled exits, total environmental control. A vehicle pulls in slowly. The suspects arrive separately, calm, focused. No raised voices, no obvious nerves. They greet the undercover officer like men conducting routine business. The conversation begins, and it's being recorded. The conversation begins, and it's being recorded. They talk about logistics, timing. They reference targets, Jewish gatherings. They talk about acting soon. This isn't bravado. This isn't hypothetical. It's confirmation. Investigators listening in know exactly what this means. The threshold is close. A pause. Silence stretches. One of the suspects reaches for what he believes are automatic firearms. That single movement changes everything. At that moment, intent becomes action.
Most terror plots don't fail at the last second. They fail quietly, months before the public ever knows they existed. This is one of those cases. In late 2023, UK authorities began monitoring a small group of men who were expressing violent anti-Semitic intent, not publicly, not at demonstrations or religious institutions, but in private conversations and encrypted online spaces. Counter-terrorism policing, working alongside MI5, identified communications that went well beyond extremist rhetoric. These men were openly discussing attacks on Jewish people at public gatherings. They were talking about timing, locations, and firearms. And the context made the threat even more alarming. Once intelligence agencies assessed the threat as credible and escalating, they made a calculated move. An undercover officer was inserted into the plot, posing as a criminal intermediary with access to automatic firearms. Crucially, the suspects were not rushed or steered toward violence. Instead, authorities allowed them to reveal themselves. Over time, the men reaffirmed their desire to attack Jewish targets, discussed logistics and casualty figures, and took practical steps toward acquiring weapons. For several months, police and intelligence officers tracked their communications, movements, and associations. Surveillance confirmed the plot had crossed a critical threshold. This was no longer ideological fixation, it was operational planning. By May 2024, investigators decided it was time to act. The supposed weapons handover was arranged at a location chosen to give police complete environmental control. Armed response units were positioned nearby, but out of sight.
Please help us make 1,000 subscribers by the year end. Make sure to subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and leave comments down below, so I can find out what content you'd like to see, and I will reply to everyone. Don't forget to hit the bell to be notified as soon as the next video drops.
Specialist firearms teams were on standby. Plainclothes officers blended into the area. Surveillance teams monitored every movement. The public remained entirely unaware. When the suspects arrived, the meeting began as planned. As conversations unfolded, the men again spoke about using the weapons against Jewish targets and about acting soon. Everything was being recorded in real time. And when one of the suspects attempted to take possession of what he believed were fully functioning automatic firearms, the legal threshold was met. Within seconds, armed counter-terrorism officers moved in. The arrests were swift and controlled. No shots were fired, no sirens, no dramatic cordons. The suspects were restrained and taken into custody quietly, even as ordinary members of the public passed nearby, unaware that a mass casualty attack had just been prevented. At the same time, Coordinated arrests and searches were carried out at other locations linked to the suspects. Phones, encrypted messaging devices, and digital storage were seized immediately under pre-authorized warrants. Speed was critical, not only to preserve evidence but to rule out any wider network or secondary threat. The men were not taken to local police stations. Instead, they were transported to a secure counter-terrorism policing custody suite in the northwest of England, a purpose-built facility used for the most serious terrorism investigations. Its location has never been publicly disclosed. Held under Schedule 8 of the Terrorism Act, the suspects were detained for extended questioning while investigators analyzed vast amounts of digital material. They were kept physically separated to prevent coordination or the contamination of accounts. From there, they were transferred under heavy security to Westminster Magistrates' Court for their initial hearings. The suspects were identified as Walid Sardoui, his brother Bilal Sardoui, and their associate Ammar Hussein. None of the men were part of a known terrorist cell. There was no direct contact with overseas handlers. Instead, investigators concluded they had self-radicalized, consuming Islamic State propaganda, reinforcing one another's beliefs, and allowing extremism to fester in private online echo chambers rather than in public institutions. Walid Sardoui was described in court as the ideological driver of the plot. Outwardly, he lived an ordinary life, working sporadically and maintaining family ties that gave little public indication of extremism. Privately, however, he was deeply immersed in antisemitic conspiracy theories and violent jihadist material. By the time police intervened, he was actively identifying Jewish gatherings as targets and discussing potential casualty numbers. His brother, Bilal Sardoui, played a different role. He was not accused of directly planning the attack, but evidence showed he was aware of what was being discussed and chose not to report it. Prosecutors argued that his silence allowed the plot to progress. Ammar Hussein, older and more socially isolated, was portrayed as the most operationally focused. He spoke less about ideology and more about execution, weapons handling, attack sequencing, and escape routes. Investigators described him as someone motivated by a combination of extremist belief and personal grievance. The case was eventually heard at Preston Crown Court. Jurors were played recordings of the suspects speaking in their own words, discussing targets, firearms, and imminent action. The defense argued exaggeration and bravado, suggesting the men never intended to follow through. The jury rejected that claim. Walid Sardoui and Ammar Hussein were convicted of preparing acts of terrorism. Bilal Sardoui was convicted of failing to disclose information about a terrorist plot. Judges concluded the men were fully committed to carrying out mass violence, and that the only reason it did not happen was because the plot was disrupted at the final safe moment. Sentencing has been scheduled for February 2026. Until then, all three remain in custody. The public only learned about the case in December 2025 when reporting restrictions were lifted after the convictions. The arrests themselves had taken place much earlier, on 8th of May 2024, following months of covert surveillance that began in late 2023. It's a stark reminder of how modern counter-terrorism works, quietly, methodically, and almost invisibly. And it raises an unsettling question. How many plots like this are stopped before anyone ever hears a word about them? In the last few months, a synagogue in Manchester has been attacked during Hanukkah. Only weeks ago, the Bondi Beach attack dominated headlines overseas. Taken together, these incidents formed part of a wider global pattern. Jewish communities being deliberately targeted by Islamist extremists, often on religious holidays, to maximize casualties and psychological impact. Investigators would later say that had this foiled UK plot gone ahead, it could have become one of the deadliest anti-Semitic terror attacks in the country's history. The contrast between these events highlights the critical difference between reactive response and proactive prevention. The Manchester synagogue attack during Hanukkah in October 2025 and the Bondi Beach attack in December 2025 were both acts of violence that reached execution. In each case, authorities responded swiftly once the attacks were underway, but by that point, harm had already been done. These incidents unfolded in public during everyday or symbolic moments and were experienced in real time by victims, witnesses, and the wider public. The impact was immediate, traumatic, and global. By contrast, the foiled plot disrupted in May 2024 never reached the public stage at all. Through intelligence-led counter-terrorism work, UK authorities identified extremist intent early, while it was still confined to private conversations and encrypted channels. Surveillance, infiltration, and patience allowed investigators to gather evidence, confirm intent, and intervene at the precise moment when the threat became operational, but before any civilians were placed in danger. There were no victims, no public panic, and no lasting trauma, precisely because the attack was stopped before it could happen.